The manhwa begins with a young noble lady, Lady Era, the only daughter of the prestigious Goldwyn ducal house, the most renowned family in the empire. Lady Era, destined from birth to be the crown prince's fiancée through divine prophecy, was a girl destined to become the empress of the empire. Day after day her beauty grew, transforming her into a noble woman of utmost grace, and on the day of her wedding to the crown prince, the empire celebrated their graceful bond, but what was to come was totally unforeseen. Their marriage ended on the very day it began, with the crown prince demanding an annulment. In the present time, the crown prince stands in the presence of his father and mother, who ask that he explain the reason for his request. His father reminds him that Lady Era is the woman chosen by the Oracle of Genius. You know the royal family must marry the one chosen by the Oracle. You've spent your first night with her, so surely you must have realized, his father ends. So why are you saying you want to cancel the marriage with the young lady? His father asks out loud. The crown prince then explains how it is said that their royal blood, the descendants of genius, feel no attraction towards ordinary women except one. It is said that when their lips meet ours. I too have never felt any attraction to a woman in my life, he reveals. I thought Lady Goldwyn might wield a mysterious power capable of changing me. A mark that only appears on the woman of the Oracle, the one that signifies her bond with royalty, the golden pattern. On the night of their wedding, they proceeded to be intimate with each other. However, even after connecting lips with each other, her back was bare, missing the golden pattern, and the crown prince felt nothing from her, not even a single trace of attraction. In the present day, the crown prince explains that it felt like he was looking at a stone or a tree, which was no different from any other woman. The queen finally speaks, exclaiming that it can't be possible. Is the lady truly the one mentioned in the oracle? The crown prince asks. Words began flying around, people murmuring about how it could be possible for the prophesied woman to fail the marking. They mumbled about how it had never happened, and questions like, if only the Goldwyn ducal is worthy of being called the golden lion of the empire, then where is the real woman of the oracle, and so what happens to the lady? Looking poorly maintained, she managed to place both her hands on her ear, recounting how the whole empire was laughing and calling her fake. In that moment of desertion, all she could hope for was for someone to miraculously save her. A year later, the noble ladies gossip about how the lady has become a regular visitor at Twin Vale, obviously because of a man. She must be needing a man to hold her instead of her husband, right? They jest. They mention how no one has actually seen the lady, and a lady slams her drink on the table, thinking people are talking out of turn without knowing anything. If it weren't for that, I wouldn't be here right now. She silently urges herself to find what she's looking for before it's too late, when suddenly a server holding a bottle of wine bumps into her and drops it to the floor, attracting the unwanted attention of the other noble ladies, who recognize her as Lady Goldwyn. She places her hand on her head, reflecting on how she didn't realize a strap of her mask was loose. She decides to go get some rest, however she gets another headache, and as she loses her balance and almost falls to the ground, a man catches her. He asks to know if she's okay and also inquires about whether she has any companions with her, since she appears quite drunk. Then could you help me a little? She asks. He escorts her to her room and is astonished when he finds the space missing any companions. She turns around and declares boldly, "You become my companion instead." The man is in shock, and she pleads with him, saying it'll just be for the night, as she can't sleep. She explains that she has a bit of insomnia and swiftly throws him onto the bed. Watching her on top of him, the man concludes that if she has insomnia she should get treatment. However, she drops her mask, revealing that she is getting treatment. She runs her hand down his chest, loosening his shirt more, and as she leans in she reveals that a handsome man is her remedy. The man has a slight puzzled expression on his face, however she continues and says his good physique will likely be more effective. She leans forward and kisses him while he grips strongly onto the blanket. They both feel their heart beating louder than ever, and after they share another kiss, the golden pattern appears on her back with a great light, and suddenly she feels a sense of comfort she's never felt but always longed for, and falls asleep on him. The next day, she opens her eyes feeling refreshed and questions when's the last she's ever slept so soundly. She gets a faint memory of the man she supposedly spent the night with and questions whether her comfort was all thanks to him. Well, it's probably just temporary, it's always the same, short-lived relief, but the pain lingers longer, she thinks. She decides to at least have a look at the strange man from the previous night. However, when she turns her head, the bed is empty. In a new scene, some knights that appear to be training gossip about the captain's appearance in the Twin Veil the previous night. A knight asks why he would take the captain there since he isn't even interested in women, when a man interrupts asking if they know why their captain isn't interested in women. He's been fighting monsters since he was young, just trying to survive, and even after the war ended he still considers it a waste of time to meet women. The man continues saying he doesn't think that way and asks whether the captain doesn't deserve a springtime in his life too, and for that reason he attempted to introduce the famously bold women of the capital to him. He also narrates how a strange lady had hugged the captain completely drunk and he took her back to her place. The knight continues and adds that they'll never know, maybe there's a possibility the two of them locked eyes on their way. However, a voice warns them to stop with the gossip already. They turn around to find their captain's cold gaze and panic. The knight, terrified, asks to know if he had a good time with the lady from the previous night while the captain remains silent. He reflects on how she'd fallen asleep in his arms and his cheeks had turned red. He turned to check if she was sleeping, and when he noticed she was, he questioned if that's how it feels like to be with a woman, so soft and pleasant. The northern lands were taken over by cold and monsters, and each time monsters ravaged around, countless orphans were created, and unfortunately the captain was one of them. Before he hit puberty, he wielded weapons and fought, growing up amidst the scent of blood and smoke. From there, the only feelings he ever had for women was nothing more than comradeship shared with the female soldiers he fought alongside. After becoming the commander of the Night Order, he looked down on subordinates who got carried away by women and as a result either neglected their training or caused trouble. While they knelt in front of him, they pleaded with him to understand how embracing a woman and resting with her will help restore morale as a man to man. However, he only further questioned what could be so good about holding a woman. One time while he was drinking, he questioned again whether there's really any difference between touching a woman and a man, since the feeling of touching a woman always felt like touching a rock or a tree. He'd always believed there was no difference, until a recent encounter left his heart racing. Seeing her swollen lip, he instinctively reached out but quickly pulled away. Overwhelmed by unfamiliar feelings, he wrapped her in a blanket and left abruptly. Nothing happened, the captain reveals. Judging from their chatter, he concludes they have time to spare and orders that they have a match. The knight with brown hair pushes the deputy commander forward and explains that he doesn't want to lose his life. However, the captain orders the deputy commander to draw his sword, questioning if that's the kind of slackened mindset they will all have when standing before the emperor. At the same time, while the captain trains with his knights, Lady Era is restless, questioning how the strange man could just leave like that without even a note. She pulls herself together and declares her need to find the man from the previous night. "Wait right there, my insomnia cure," she declares. Later at night, she tries to write down all she can recall from the previous night, but even though she's been thinking all day, she can't recall that much. She thinks she should have at least asked to know his name, and after sulking she gets up and questions what the point of sitting there, she wouldn't remember anyway. She searches for a mask, thinking all she has to do is get out and at least find some clue about him, but as soon as she grabs the mask, a lady rushes in. The lady informs her that the news of her going to the Twin Veil is spreading rapidly in high society and they're tarnishing her reputation without any regard. The lady explains that even if her father the Duke is in his current state, she as his daughter should keep her composure so that she can find a suitable match again. Lady Era asks why she is bringing that up again. However, the lady cautions her not to say that, adding that marriage is the destiny of every lady, and if she's able to marry into a respectable family, her father will recover. The lady urges her to take care of herself at least for the Duke's sake and find someone worthy. 6 months ago, the Duke fell ill, and if it hadn't been for the city's deputy minister, he would have been difficult to save. After the doctor's examination, he revealed that it was a deep mental affliction. She was later informed that only by seeing his daughter happy and cheerful could he find mental stability and begin his recovery, and so following the high priest's recommendation, she went to the capital with one wish, for her father's condition to improve. Her head begins to ache and she almost loses her balance. She reflects on how her father, still in a coma, would often call her first whenever he woke up as if he wanted to confirm that she was doing well and okay, and that's why for her father's sake, she must survive. She needs to appear as happy and healthy as possible, however the excruciating headache and insomnia are making her goal difficult to achieve. Unlike her father, divine power has no effect on her headaches, and her attending physician stated that if she keeps being unable to sleep, she won't even last half a year, and still the only remedy she's discovered for her insomnia is men. They help her sleep even if it's only temporary without nightmares, but her reputation will continue to sink further into disgrace. However, she isn't concerned because no matter what she does, she can't go back to the way things were before, so now, she can only struggle to stay alive, even if it's just to stay alive. In a new scene, the commander of the Knights trains alone, however, he keeps on getting distracted. He keeps on imagining the lady that he soon questions his sanity, reflecting on how he hasn't been able to stop thinking of her all day long. He mumbles about how he can't even swing his sword to forget because he's unable to concentrate. Am I losing my focus because of a woman? I've never experienced anything like this before. The Knights approach, asking what he's doing outside. He turns to ask where they're headed, and they reply, "We were planning to have a drink in Twinvale." "Care to join us, Commander?" Remembering his encounter with the strange lady in Twinvale, he agrees. As he puts on his coat, a thought lingers, he wants to see her again. In a new scene, some men recognizing her approach Lady Era in Twinvale and ask whether she would like them to keep her company, however she declines. She retorts that she's looking for a handsome man. Her statement provokes a man who then questions whether she still thinks herself to be a noble empress to be, adding that he'll show her a lesson. He grabs her hand, and as she struggles he questions what's with her pretense of being high class now, since she's just an illegitimate child whose father she doesn't even know. "Didn't you also inherit your mother's love for men? I heard rumors that your real father is a stableman." "Huh? I heard he was a male prostitute. I heard he was a beggar. Which one is it out of the three?" they ask. The lady isn't moved and instantly bites the man's hand, provoking him to raise his hand to stroke her face. However, a man stops him. He turns around to find a man with a fierce gaze who turns to the lady and asks to know if she's all right. The man pulls away from his grip and asks why he's interrupting so rudely. He warns him to find another woman to rescue if he's trying to play hero, since the lady is only looking for a one-night partner. "Or are you curious about who this woman is?" he asks. The man turns to his friend, boasting that it seems he's hit a weak spot, remarking that the men who visit the place are all the same. The noble Lady Goldwyn visits Twinvale every night, seeking comfort in a man's arms. "The rumors were so baseless I was about to give up, but to think I would meet the lady herself with my own eyes." "Wasn't there a man with you last night too? Then it's our turn today," they all proclaim. Her head begins to ache again, but as soon as the commander grabs her hand, her world becomes bright again. He remarks that it feels like she needs help, and if he's wrong she's free to refuse, while she can't stop thinking of the sense of relief that came from only holding hands with him. As she looks up at him, she thinks it was a coincidence. "It was you, wasn't it? The man from last night." The man, provoked, demands to know who he thinks he is. They ask if he knows their identity, adding that they'd met with the lady first. The commander takes a closer look and realizes he recognizes them from somewhere. Lady Era declines his offer for help, adding that she's used to dealing with thugs like that on her own, as she walks up to the man and strikes him in the face. The man mask drops to the floor and she says that if she's considered dirty then he must be too. After all, they are both there for the same thing, to find a one-night partner, isn't that right? "Sir Neve," she calls out, startling the man, who asks how she knows his name. She replies saying how could someone like her, who was once the crown prince's fiancé, not recognize the royal guards, especially the knight guarding the crown prince's palace. She asks if the crown prince is doing well, adding that she has so many questions. Should we talk more? The man turns his head away, claiming they don't know anything, and as they hurry they tell her she must be mistaking them for someone else. Behind, Lady Era sighs a breath of relief. However, the commander asks if those kinds of things happen often, and she says not so openly like that. She reveals that she'd made a bit of a mistake the previous day, however things will be different moving forward. The captain looks let down, however she thanks him for helping her. Thanks to you I was able to resolve it without causing any trouble. But, why did you leave alone in the morning? She asks. The captain responds that he's unsure of what she means, however she calls him a liar as she steps closer. You remember me too, don't you? I wanted to meet you again once more. Now that I think about it, I never got to thank you for being my companion last night, she finishes. The captain retorts that she doesn't need to thank him since after all he's just a one-night plaything to her. The next day, her maid informs her to make sure there is absolutely no trouble at the victory ceremony, adding that no matter what anyone mentions about Twinvale, she must deny everything. Sensing she's distracted, Casper calls her to ask if she's listening, and she says of course, she'll behave and return quietly while she silently questions what it has to be that day of all days that she must visit the imperial capital. Today is the day of the victory ceremony, celebrating the year of the long war against the monsters, and a grand banquet will be held at the capital. That will be the first time returning since their wedding, and she questions whether she will be okay. However, one thing was certain, that the man whose name she doesn't know has the ability to cure her illness, through physical contact. She reflects on how holding his hand or kissing him seems to help. However, she needs to test other methods, but there was a problem as she had no idea how to find him again, and also she knew not his name. She recalls how she mentioned that it was a mistake and mumbles that his eyes clearly looked disappointed. What if I never see him again? At the imperial capital, the nobles gossip about how the lady had apparently showed up in Twinvale. She stands in a corner listening to them mutter about how she's a disgrace to the empire, while her expression looks sullen as she encourages herself she must endure. The king summons the Duke Brian and the knights. While the duke kneels in the presence of the king, she notices a familiar figure. That man, Ice found him, my insomnia cure. The king welcomes the count, who only bows in respect, saying he only fulfilled the duty entrusted to him. Lo Byron, who was once the commander of the Imperial Knights and a loyal confidant to the Emperor, however shortly after the first prince's death, the Emperor suddenly granted him the abandoned land in the north. The land which the Emperor named Byron, and announced that he must lead them to victory in the war against the monsters. The battle to subdue the mission seemed like a reasonable mission on the surface, however no one knew it was an unjust arrangement. The blessing of genius doesn't reach there, causing monsters to increase, hence, the north was a land of death. The emperor brings up his 3 children that he lost during the war and remarks that how could he not understand the feeling of parents who lost their children. However, the count remarks that it was an honorable death for the empire. The emperor asks him not to say that, adding that excessive loyalty can be toxic. He announces that he will make sure to honor the fallen, and also he wouldn't forget to praise the knights' hard work either. If there's anything else you need, tell me, Count. Esteemed sir, I have a request. Sir Rivers, commander of the Byron Knights, please approve adopting him as my son, your majesty. All bikes of the empire receive blessings from the temple as soon as they're born, and with the emperor's approval, one's name is added to the noble list, and the same applies to adoption by the nobles. It meant that everyone in the empire was under the emperor's rule. Sir Rivers steps forward and kneels in the presence of the emperor while Lady Era observes him in the distance. She realizes that perhaps she couldn't find him in the noble registry because he is from the north. I was worried I'd never find him. Suddenly, her eyes widens as she questions if that means he would have to go back to the north. The emperor speaks, saying he supposes since he has no surname, he came from a plebeian background. The commander remarks that it was all thanks to the count's generosity that he was able to wield a sword in the name of the empire, and the emperor asks if he has any other family. He reveals that he'd lost his parents to monsters and was left alone. The emperor then grants his permission, adding that for the sake of those who gave their life for the empire he has no choice but to grant the request. A man appears with a paper, and that moment, the emperor stamps River Byron's name into the noble registry, permitting the adoption of Count Byron. Later, Lady Era stands alone, thinking to return to avoid an awkward encounter for no reason. As she silently hopes for nothing to happen, a man appears which she greets, calling uncle. The father of the crown princess, Baron Edis Anton, tells her no one will be aware they are together. He speaks about her health and adds that if she had told him beforehand he would have at least visited the palace, but it has been difficult. She tells him if she hadn't attended there would have been more controversy among the nobles, and her uncle remarks that in times like that he needs to be her support, adding that he's very embarrassed by his incompetence as the head of the family. Era tells him not to speak like that, saying she still trusts him a lot. Finally, he requests that she accompanies the crown princess more often since she remains unfamiliar with the etiquette of the imperial palace, so having her nearby will be a great help. He adds that it will be more efficient if she becomes a maid to the crown princess. Are we not family? Era holds steady contact with the floor with his gaze that appeared as if he was pressuring her to become a maid to the crown princess. Later, the emperor discusses how he hasn't had peace of mind since he left the capital. He explains that everyone he heard news from the north, the weight on his heart grew as he questioned whether the emperor really did something bad to an old friend. The emperor tells him if it weren't for that incident, he would have sent someone else to the north. Are you blaming this emperor too? The emperor asks. The count responded, asking how he could harbor personal feelings when the safety of the empire was at risk, saying he will simply follow his will. The emperor remarks that indeed he is a great man and he harbored great admiration for his character, which is why he kept him by his side. I hope the count's adopted son has the same character. The count explains that he is a man who has spent his whole life on the battlefield, he is honest and he keeps away from politics, and his loyalty to the empire will be stronger than anyone else's. The emperor is pleased and says first he will need to learn how to live as a noble, as there shouldn't be situations where he is looked down upon because of his origin. He agrees, and the emperor adds that before returning to the north, why not arrange a marriage for him first? The emperor explains that if he marries a woman from a legitimate family, the negative reaction will decrease. The count is confused, and the emperor remarks that the matter of heirs is something that the sooner it's resolved the better. If you need any help, let me know at any time. I don't want him to end up in the wrong relationship, the emperor finishes. Year 957 of the imperial calendar, a new oracle descended upon the Cloaca Empire, on the day the golden lion's roar shakes the earth. That girl in the territory of Goldwyn, 2 girls were born. Era Goldwyn, the daughter of the Duchess who passed away due to puerperal fever, and Judith Anton, daughter of Baron Anton, a member of a collateral branch. The citizens naturally believed she was the woman of the oracle, since the golden lion was the symbol of the Goldwyn house. The golden lion was a symbol of the Goldwyn house, and the lost star referred to her who experienced the death of her mother, and from the moment of her birth, she accepted the fate imposed upon her. At the young age of 10, she got betrothed to the crown prince, and each year during the foundation festival, she stood by his side as his fiancée, and each time she could feel his cold, empty gaze. To him she was nothing more than a stone or a tree, something incapable of stirring any emotion within him. She would often cry to her father about not wanting to attend the foundation festival and complain about the crown prince breaking yet another of her stuffed toys, almost like he found it amusing seeing her cry. She would ask her father if she really has to marry him, adding that she's scared of him, and the empress would reassure her, saying everything will change once they're married, as the crown prince is still young and enjoys playing mischievous pranks, and since the blood of genius runs through his veins, he doesn't feel any attraction towards girls, so he must play with her as he would with a boy. She would say on the day they wed, even the crown prince will open his eyes to true love. However, on their wedding night his gaze still remained the same and her entire world crumbled, and when she was cast out of the imperial palace, Judith Anton stood by his side. They were wed, and the nobles mumbled about how he finally successfully completed the imprinting. In their eyes she related perfectly to the oracle of the lost star. They insulted her mom, spreading rumors that she met with a strange man and committed infidelity. After the engagement was broken, she stopped all social activities and locked herself away in the estate, and that was when her headaches began. After her father collapsed, the servants started debating who should be appointed as the representative of the head of the House Goldwyn. Some nobles had a meeting discussing how in normal condition the house would have gone to her husband, or in a different case, or however they debated how they could entrust the house to an illegitimate child, and finally settled on Baron Anton. This her uncle received full authority over House Goldwyn without obtaining the consent of her father, who is a part of the ducal house, nor hers. The Baron brushed his statement as a light joke before taking his leave. In a new scene, she sits by her father's side in the temple seeking advice on what to do. Reflecting on how after her broken engagement, her father had made a firm promise that she's his daughter and no one's words will ever drive him to doubt, and he'll surely prove it and find a way to restore her honor, so she should wait and not give up, and he also wouldn't abandon her either. The minister walks in and discusses how her father appears to be especially cheerful that day, saying maybe he's happy she visits so often. The minister mentions that it might be thanks to the large donation the Baron made to the temple recently, which has improved the conditions in the infirmary. Astonished, Era asks if her uncle indeed made a donation, and the minister asks if she had no idea. It's said that he's been spending quite a lot lately, and there are even rumors that the Baron spends more than Duke Goldwyn. The minister informs her that the Baron also controls funds for the Crown Prince, and she questions how it could be possible, since with just the fortune of the Baron's family it is impossible for him to accumulate so much wealth not without using the Goldwyn family money for personal use. The minister notices her reaction and asks if she's okay. She assures him that she's fine and reveals that she must leave that day, adding that he takes good care of her father as she'll return soon. She steps outside filled with regrets for entrusting their family's representation to her uncle, even if she had to endure the mockery for being an illegitimate child. She should never have left the mansion. When she returned to the Duke's mansion after hearing about her father, everything had already changed. More servants who she didn't know were present, and the vassals completely excluded her from her responsibilities, and the only thing she could do there was lock herself in an empty room and suffer from headaches all day. If I remain passive, I might lose the Goldwyn family to my uncle. Even now the servants of the Baron family are acting as if they own the mansion, so I need to find a way to solve this insomnia and the headaches and change the situation, Era thinks. Slowly she finds herself unable to reason clearly due to her headache when she bumps into someone with a familiar presence who asks to know what she's doing there. Don't tell me you've been drinking at the temple. Really, what is hurting you? The man asks with great concern. Noticing the papers that drop to the floor, she realizes he must be there to get notarization for the noble registry. Her vision gets blurry, and as she almost collapses, the captain is the one to catch her. As he holds her arm, a golden light surrounds them, and once again, she feels her pain vanish. At that moment, she realizes she needs River Byron, because only then can she solve the problem of the duchy. If she can make decisions and act without the frequent headaches, she will reclaim her father's lost position, so no matter what, she needs to keep him by her side, by any means necessary. He tries to get a priest to come check on her, however she stops him, reflecting on her needs to still keep the headaches a secret. She confides in the commander that she doesn't want to cause a fuss over nothing. My father is currently receiving treatment in this ward. I don't want to burden the priests any further, she reveals. The commander tries to convince her and says before anyone could see that she's unwell, however she interrupts and says, almost fell by accident and you caught her, right? He lets go of her hand and she thanks him, saying she avoided an embarrassing situation thanks to him. She tells him it seems she's always receiving help from him with a gentle bow. The commander mutters bow before saying it seems she's realized who he is, and she responds that no noble who attended the victory ceremony would fail to know him. You're the war hero who led the Northern Monster War to victory, and by tomorrow every citizen of the Empire will know your name. Extending the document forward, she adds that it's rare for a commoner to be adopted into a noble family, and he remarks that that sounds like advice not to offend the distinguished nobles. Stepping forward closer, she whispers that he thinks of it as a kind suggestion, as just as she's received help from him, she intends to offer him assistance as well. Later, both the commander and the count stand in the temple greeting the minister. The minister makes some small talk before saying that he's always valued his loyalty to the empire and his faith in genius above everything else, and he hopes his adopted son shares the same virtues. First, the priest blesses him before proclaiming his name again before genius and recording him as a noble citizen of the Cloaca Empire. The notarization ceremony was simpler than he'd expected, with a series of ordinary proclamations, and perhaps that's why he suddenly thought that the Lady Goldwyn might have been right. He'd mentioned to her that he didn't know how she intends to help him, but he isn't in need of any help. However, she claimed that he will, following that in the Cloaca Empire, legitimacy and lineage matter above all else. She mentioned that because the emperor had personally approved of it, no noble will openly oppose it, but soon they will seek to tear him down behind the emperor's back. She added that that isn't his only problem, because the count will also become a target. However, he'd protested that since the count was a longtime friend of the emperor, anyone who turns against him would be in serious trouble. Era had responded that this would only be true if the count received fair treatment, making some unclear sentences before him that appeared to cause him discomfort. If what the lady says is true, if the imperial family and the temple really intend to neglect the north like this, he thinks, clenching his fist. He reflects on how she'd asked that they discuss the rest when they meet again and set up a meeting for them at Twinvale the following night. In the end, I have no choice but to follow Lady Goldwyn's lead, the commander thinks, even if it means becoming nothing more than a fleeting companion for the night. In a new scene, Baron Anton mentions to Era that she's coming home later and later. He tells her he'd heard she stayed at the temple for quite a long time and asks whether his brother perhaps regained consciousness. Era responds saying no, her father still remained unconscious, and rather the high priest had come into the hospital room, so she got delayed because she briefly greeted him, and it appears he often checks on her father's condition. The high priest, that's truly something to be grateful for. I will personally thank the high priest on behalf of the Goldwyn ducal house. Her uncle finishes. Aura, sitting quietly, questions whether perhaps by thanks he means making a donation. She reflects on how the high priest had informed her of the Baron's large donation to the temple, and she immediately questions how her uncle managed to donate such a large amount of money. The acting head doesn't have the authority to use the family's assets recklessly, and only the budget approved by the vassals meeting can be spent for the specified purpose. So for her uncle to handle funds so easily, she concludes that it must either be because the vassals are siding with him or he's embezzling the funds. She recalls how he'd mentioned that he heard she was spending time at the temple and questions whether he could have possibly planted spies in the temple too, concluding that if she had spoken with the commander for too long, she might have been exposed. Moments ago, she's not so sure about anyone turning against the count being in trouble because he's a close friend of the emperor. She mentioned that it would appear like that if the count was treated fairly, and asked if he didn't find it at all strange that during the 25 years of fighting the monster war, the emperor didn't send any troops to the north, and when the war hero returned, there wasn't even a victory parade, and also the only reward for winning the war was his rise in status. He told her he didn't know much about such matters and had assumed that the higher-ups handled it appropriately, and the emperor promised to recognize the knight's efforts, but she interrupted and made him understand that even though the emperor might appear of gentle nature, he prioritizes the empire's safety above all else, and since the late emperor was swept up in the rebellion and passed, he wouldn't want the military strength of any one region to grow stronger, and that's why the support for the north is limited to mere survival. It's impossible to rebuild the desolate north or to feed the territory's people adequately. The commander responded that it seems she wants him to doubt the emperor's true intentions, and she replied that if that's the path that benefits him, that way she can assist him. Back to the present day, Baron Anton tells her it's been a while since they all dined together like that, since she always seems to take her meals into her room. Are you avoiding the table because you feel uncomfortable? Era tells him she's just not been feeling well when a person says hearing about her illness every time is getting tiresome. The lady with brown hair tells her pretending not to notice can only happen so many times, and then asks that she comes up with a new excuse next time. The Baron calls her, but she just asks if she's said something wrong. She tells him they say the girl who is always ill has been secretly frequenting Twinvale, and not just once but several times, to meet with a man. The Baroness explains that whenever she meets with the other noble ladies her face burns with embarrassment, and his son adds that it's true as he has quite a few young nobles around him who claim to have seen Era. Twinvale has become quite popular among young nobles lately, Lionel Anton finishes. Her uncle sighs, saying a place of such indulgence is becoming popular, it's truly the end of times. The Baron warns them to be mindful of their actions since the Emperor also disapproves of the Twinvale. All right, Lionel, the social season is about to begin, so be careful not to fall out of favor, and that way you might meet a lady from a better family, his mom states. She turns to Era and coldly declares that she hopes she also understands as well, she mustn't bring disgrace to the family's name any longer, and she replies that she'll keep that in mind. The next day, the physician of the Goodwin house examines Era, who asks to know if her uncle had mentioned anything else. The physician reveals that he'd only instructed him to remain silent about her health condition as he doesn't want the Goldwyn name to be mentioned externally any further. The physician assures her not to worry about anything else and instead focus solely on her recovery, adding that the Duke also wishes for her full recovery before departing. As she observes the physician take his leave from the window, she thinks that there's no need to mention that the painkillers aren't working. She reflects on how she usually had to endure the headaches by taking several pills, but thanks to the commander her head has felt clear all day. I think I'll be fine without the painkillers for the time being, of course that's only if Lord River accepts the proposal. Later, her maid is in shock when she informs her that she will be visiting Twinvale again. She reminds her how she was scolded by the Baroness and adds that with the social season approaching there will be many nobles coming from their estates, and if she gets caught up in another scandal, it could become a real problem. She also adds that pretending to be her every night is becoming too much for her, but Era pleads with her to let her have one more night, explaining that she has an important appointment. She assures her that she will no longer be going out at night starting the following day. She makes a promise before urging her to help her get ready as she needs to look even more beautiful that night, while Casper looks back questioning what kind of appointment it could be. In the closet, Aura thinks of her goal to make sure the commander can't refuse the proposal and concludes that there's nothing like using beauty to persuade him. In a new scene, Lord Rivers monitors his knights, who appear to be more motivated than usual during their training. Not only did they win the hard and long war, but they were also privileged to have an audience with the Emperor, and as a knight of the Empire, there's no greater honor than that, the deputy commander says. The deputy commander also mentions how the Emperor had approved his adoption. The deputy commander tells him he's sure the entire orders felt recognized, since such generous treatment has never happened in the history of the Cloica Empire. The deputy commander explains that because of that he's relieved, and admits that he was always worried whenever the supply shipment didn't arrive on time, which made him think whether the imperial family had abandoned the north, but it seems he was wrong. Seeing how they honored the fallen warriors, it's clear he was mistaken. The deputy commander once again adds that he's really glad he now has something to tell his family waiting in the north. The commander stays quiet for a while before announcing a break for 10 minutes, assuring himself that since the Emperor promised the reward for victory in front of everyone, there won't be any unexpected changes, so they must make it happen for the sake of the North. However, such a vow didn't last long. The captain of the knights yells in frustration over the reward for the knights, which is just 2,000 gold coins, protesting that the annual budget for the Byron territory alone exceeds 4,000 gold coins. The Baron tells him not to raise his voice, adding that it's the Emperor's decision. The commander tries to speak when he recalls how the deputy commander had asked what'll happen if perhaps the Emperor gives too much grain and gold, adding that they can't afford to be short on carriages while returning to the north. Another knight had asked why he was asking something so obvious, saying of course the Emperor would grant them the carriages as well. Lord River appears disappointed before pleading with the Baron to consider it one more time, stating that they can't let those who's lost their families to war face another harsh season, and at the very least they must solve the food crisis and rebuild the territory. But as he meets the Baron's cold gaze, he recalls the lady's words concerning the territory and thinks, it seems the words of Princess Goldwyn were true. His Majesty doesn't want the North to be fully restored. Later at night, the captain arrives at the Twinvale when he hears someone state their worry that he wouldn't arrive that night, but he did. Have you been waiting long? Lady Era asks. He replies that he'd also just arrived, and after observing him she tells him it seems he's brought everything needed for the night. That mask, it suits you well. The commander asks if wearing a mask isn't a rule there, and she states that it's an unspoken rule as many nobles still consider the tea and veil indulgent. She warns that they have to be careful to avoid becoming the subject of scandal, and also mentions that there are indeed times when people don't wear masks. Those who are newly elevated from the territory like you, or those with enough power that their identity doesn't matter, but usually it's the former, she explains. Era suggests they move to another room to continue their conversation, revealing that there are far too many eyes there. As they walk to another room, Lord Rivers can only question why his heart has been racing since earlier, almost feeling like the first day he'd met the princess. They get into the room, and as she takes off her mask she tells him he's appeared like he had something to say since, and he thinks, yes, I came to accept the princess' proposal for the North. A knight mustn't be swayed by personal feelings. The princess said she could help the North. I want to hear exactly what kind of help that entails. Era reflects on how at that moment, the emperor's will must have reached the count's household, and the emperor is someone who is clear on both connection and severances. All that's left is how to persuade this man, and even if I mention that his touch is what cures my headache, he'll just think I'm strange. In the Goldwind territory, they harvest 3 times a year. The weather is warm year-round, so wheat and sugar never dries out, and resources like salt are abundant. If you cooperate with me, I will provide the North with resources of the Goldwind territory, she retorts. The commander informs her that reviving the North requires more resources than one could imagine, and she tells him she's aware and she's prepared for it. She also tells the commander that things will become easier if she regains the position of family representative. The first thing I'll do is return to high society. There is no better place than social circles to gather information and expand influence. Right now the princess is a half-princess mired in scandal. There are rumors she's an illegitimate child, and after being jilted, she became a wild pleasure-seeking fool. She explains that that's why she needs his help, and if she's being straightforward, she needs his achievements and reputation as a war hero. She explains that Lord River is an idol and hope for the common people and has a reputation even the nobility can't ignore. She tells him when the social seasons begin, he'll attract more attention than anyone else at the imperial court's ball. At that time, introduce me as Lord River's partner. Lord River's task is to get me safely into high society. In a new scene, Baron Anton goes to visit the physician, who asks if today is the day for the regular checkups for Era. He asks if he delivered the item he gave him, and the physician nods, saying just like before he administered the prescription he provided. The physician reflects, okay, how the medicine prescribed the last time should have been taken, so its effects should show soon. The Baron tells him it's good news, adding that Era's life must be running out soon. He drops some pills, saying next time they'll prescribe it. It's time to wrap things up with her, Baron Anton proclaims. At the Empress's palace, she discusses how there isn't much time left until the social season. It was around this time you entered the Imperial Palace, wasn't it? I can't believe it's already been a year. Time truly flies. The maid hands her a paper, and the Empress informs her that it's a list of nobles who should be invited to the Imperial Ball. You need to start getting accustomed to the duties of the inner palace. The Empress wants that since it'll be the first set of invitations she'll be sending as Crown Princess, she mustn't make any mistakes, and if she faces any difficulties, she should ask Lady Oakland for assistance. This girl is such a handful. Back when Era was around, I didn't need to worry about things like this, the Empress thinks. The Crown Princess speaks up, asking whether an invitation should be sent to Duke Goldwind's family as well, but the Empress responds saying it seems the Crown Princess is quite curious about many things. The Crown Princess apologizes and explains that she'd only thought since the Duke was still bedridden she was wondering if it would be appropriate for Lady Goldwind to attend the ball, while the Empress responds that it's merely a formality to send the invitation, so she shouldn't think too much about it. The Crown Princess takes her leave, and the Empress walks up to the window and mutters, "That girl won't come anyway." At the same time, the commander asks Era if she's saying she intends to use him to reclaim the position of acting head of her household, using the northern aid supplies as leverage. Era thinks he isn't wrong and questions why it feels like everything has been discovered. The use is probably the only word that can truly define their relationship. She thinks from the commander's perspective it must have been quite aggravating since it's essentially the same as proposing a trade with the lives of the peasants. I was too hasty thinking I had to persuade him no matter what. The commander notices the sudden change in her expression and questions why the person who was confidently making a proposal just a moment ago now has that look on her face. He tells her she doesn't need to make that expression, adding that her proposal is quite appealing. He shares his concern that it might upset the crown prince seeing how she has deep ties with the imperial family and His Highness might direct his malice towards the count's family. That's not entirely unexpected, however, the crown prince I know. She tells the commander he probably wouldn't care much, reflecting on how he told her he felt nothing from her, no charm whatsoever. She tells the commander to the crown prince she was nothing and pleads with him to think about the people he needs to protect, and in return she'll also focus on the things she needs to protect as well. Caressing his cheek, she tells him they've each staked what's most precious to them, so at least it wouldn't be a losing battle. The commander then mentions that people might begin to question their relationship, they might wonder why he chose her of all people, and she asks, then what about saying it was love at first sight? He tells her they'll say a naive knight, oblivious noble society and untouched by a woman's hand, was captivated by the empire's greatest seductress, and it may become irreversible, but he can handle that much. She asks for his answer while he thinks of how whenever she looks at him he feels as though the temperature is rising, as if he's bewitched by something, unable to quench the thirst and hunger inside him. Why is it that I don't even feel the slightest desire to push this woman away? He questions before giving his response, gladly. He leans in for a kiss and declares that he will gladly follow the princess's wishes. In a new scene, some noble ladies discuss how Lady Goldwyn had appeared at Vale again, but this time she was with Sir River, the commoner knight who was adopted into the Byron family. They mentioned that it seems quite a few people had seen them kiss and question whether the lady has no concern for her family's reputation at all. Later, the Baroness goes to meet Era, asking if it wasn't enough that she's been recklessly going in and out of Twinvale, she's already tarnished the family's name, so she should know when to stop. The Baroness asks how shameless she can be to play around with a man in such a shallow way, striking her in the face. The Baroness exclaims that she should have kicked her out from the start, and leaving someone like her in the family has now yielded a bad result. "I'm sorry, Aunt," Era apologizes. She explains to her aunt that actually she's secretly developed feelings for someone and as a result ended up acting recklessly without realizing it. She tells her she shouldn't have done that, considering the crown princess, the imperial highness, and her uncle, adding that it's all her fault and she has sinned because she's neglected her prayers. She begs her aunt to help her atone for her sins, stating that if only she grants her permission she would like to serve and repent at Monte Grace. The Baroness reflects on how it's the poor house on the outskirts of the capital, a place where the poor and sick gather endlessly, and I even said there are more bodies buried there than survivors. A smile forms on her face as she asks if she's truly willing to walk into such a beggar's den all by herself, asking what luck that is. The Baroness accepts and informs her that she will write a letter to the Monte Grace, so she should only focus on preparing to leave without any worries. With a smile on her face, the Baroness asks what about staying there until the end of the social season, stating that if she shows genuine remorse, no one would question her behavior anymore. She asks if her aunt really thinks that would work, and she says of course, and by the time she gets back, everything will be back to where it was. The Baroness takes her leaves, while she smiles in victory, thinking she's really looking forward to it. In a new scene, a man reads a letter informing him about the rumors that the young lady appears to have found a lover. He wonders what kind of guy it would be this time when a man with long blonde hair asks if he's really going to return to the capital, and he says he should. "If I leave my position vacant for too long, the young lady might forget about me," he claims. At the Imperial Palace, a man says recently he's been hearing frequent disturbances from Twinvale. He warns Count Byron to be cautious so as not to offend the Emperor, saying he's sure he doesn't want to lose the hard-earned position of the acting head of his family. The Baron apologizes, stating they've already taken several measures to ensure that no further problems arise, so there's no need for him to concern himself. He places his hand on his shoulder, saying that's how it should be, mentioning that at the moment there are too many eyes watching. The man asks him if that's his first time attending a state council meeting and urges him to rely on his grandfather's guidance. "Make sure that you don't disgrace my name," he finishes. They proceed with the meeting, and after discussing the first subject, the strange man whispers into the Count's ears. The Count speaks about the flood control project in the western region and says they shall revisit the matter upon Duke Lindemann's return. They proceed and announce the next topic, the costs of reconstruction in the northern region. The Emperor reveals that he was under the impression that the matter had already been settled. Marquis High brings up how during their last meeting they only focused on war compensations, since compensations are meant to console knights who bled in the battle and their bereaved families. He adds that it would be wise to allocate a separate budget for Northern Territories reconstruction, stating that even though the war has ended, it's likely that the people of the North are still living in ruins. A man agrees with the Marquis, but he states that currently they lack the resources to allocate and manage such a budget, and as he's aware, the Western Flood Control Project has already consumed a substantial amount of the treasury. However, Duke Anton reveals that there might be a solution. He explains that to rebuild the territories they'll definitely require labor, since no matter how much gold or supplies they have, without manpower the process will be delayed endlessly. Count Byron asks if he has an alternative, to which he replies yes. Count Anton then explains that by returning displaced northerners from various territories to their homeland, they can facilitate the reconstruction. The northern regions have always depended on the temples and other territories to shelter war orphans due to its inability to accommodate them. He declares that it's now time to reap the fruit of those efforts. He announces that 25 years isn't a short time, and it's more than enough for children orphaned by war to grow into capable adults, and if they select skilled individuals among the northerners and relocate them back to the north, their assets will naturally follow them, buying them time in return. The Marquis argues that even his solution has limits, and he agrees and shares that he's considered other methods also. Investigate Twinvale in the capital. Hosting large-scale casino events at night and auctions require significant financial resources, and yet no one seems to know who owns the place. Wouldn't it be worth confirming whether Twinvale pays its taxes properly or harbors illegal funds? Duke Anton proclaims. The Emperor seems pleased with his suggestion and declares that the matter will be entrusted to the Crown Prince, with the Minister of Finance assisting in the investigation. They conclude the meeting for the day while the strange man appears provoked and clenches his fists tightly. At the Monte Grace poorhouse, Era is welcomed by a priest. She steps out of the carriage elegantly and asks if the chief priest had gotten replaced. He says yes since last spring and introduces himself as Alfred, now in charge of the Monte Grace. The poorhouse was established by the temple to aid vagrants and poor patients. However, after the war with monsters caused a sharp increase in vagrants, the temple's budget alone was insufficient to sustain operations, and eventually the poorhouse began to rely on donations made by nobles. Among them, the Monte Grace has long been supported by the Goldwyn ducal family. The family sends sufficient funds annually, ensuring the transparency in their use, and as a result there were no longer people starving in the Monte Grace until a year ago. Now, the young lady stands in terror as she reflects on the groans of the sick, the cries of hungry children, and the stench of death that hung heavy in the air, which was worse than she'd expected. She asks the chief priest why patients are being left there like that, and responds that there aren't enough beds to accommodate them, as since the Duke collapsed, all aid from the Goldwyn has been completely cut off. She appears confused, and the chief priest says it's a common issue for poorhouses, so she shouldn't feel too burdened, as they were just happy that the aid was sent consistently until that moment. However, she is in doubt, thinking the priests might be embezzling funds and deceiving her. However, if I return to the ducal estate, the truth will come to light. They wouldn't need to fabricate a story about aid being cut off unless it were true. Furthermore, even the retainers don't dare to stop the aid arbitrarily, since only the family head has the authority to approve or deny such payments. Era thinks. She reflects on how currently both her uncle and the steward Giles manage the family's finances, so if anyone tampered with the funds, they're the most suspicious. She reflects on how it was her uncle who'd brought Giles there and hands him jewelry, suggesting he uses it to treat the people who are critically ill and provide at least minimal rations to the people who are starving. She then adds that with that, they should be able to take care of the urgent matters at the moment, and the chief priest thanks her. Her maid asks if she's really planning on staying there, and she replies that it should be fine since there's someone she just met there after all. Later, the chief priest takes her to the room often used by ladies of the house with the most beautiful view of the sunset. He asks if she thinks it's beautiful, adding that compared to the duke's house it is lacking, but he believes the princess wouldn't have any major difficulties staying there, though there may be times where she runs into others. She turns to the chief priest and asks if nobles still volunteer at the poorhouse during those days. The chief priest tells her it's not like before, and stating that as she sees things have gotten difficult ever since the donations stopped, but occasionally some people still visit, and they are people with very deep faith. Later, Era observes from her window the people leaving the Monte Grace and then turns to ask her maid if perhaps all the servants have left. Her maid nods, saying it was just as she'd instructed. She'd taken them inside the house and they panicked and fled. She explains that they were so flustered they didn't even mention when they would be coming back for the lady, almost as if they never intended to return from the start. "I wonder, does Uncle wish for me not to come back?" Era asks with a betrayed expression. She reflects on how she'd thought everything to be a misunderstanding, since with her father being absent the only family member she could trust was her uncle, but as time passed there were things she suddenly began to realize, like the cold looks in her uncle's eyes whenever she faced him, the things that slowly disappeared from her father's belongings in the mansion. Above all, a ledger she needs to find in the office that day, and she just needs to hurry before her uncle returns, and she must find out before she leaves the Monte Grace. As she goes through the documents, terror spreads across her face. Later she reflects on how the ledger was so poorly maintained it didn't seem befitting of a duchy, but what stood out most was the suspicious transactions. What kind of place is the Tail Merchant Guild to receive payments comparable to the upkeep of a high-ranking noblest estate every month? She thinks that if such a sum was paid, the amount of goods purchased should be significant, or it must have been some kind of extravagant luxury. Could this be related to the withdrawal of funds from the Monte Grace? She questions. Firstly, she thinks to figure out where the money is going, and her maid observing her from behind can't shake the feeling of her lady feeling hurt, so she decides to change the topic. She tells the lady it's a relief because when she stated she would be coming to the Monte Grace she was so worried, and then she goes about to chat about the room. She tells the lady she doesn't have to hide it from her, saying she actually had a plan all along. Era turns to Casper and shares that it's true she had a plan, but there was one thing she still hadn't told her. She reveals to Casper that that place is a space used for secret trysts between noble women. Trysts, Casper yells, demanding to know what the lady was thinking. Many nobles would visit the Monte Grace to repent. Scandalous troublemakers of high society, ladies entangled in rumors, and central nobles who incurred the emperor's wrath. Each of them would seek out the struggling poor and offer charity, raising prayers of repentance before genius. Just the fact that an esteemed noble spent time in a den of despair was enough to prove their sincerity, but all of that was just hearsay. For a long time, the Monte Grace had been generously funded by the Duke's household, making it one of the healthiest aid centers for the poor. The hungry were given food, the sick were provided with medicine without hesitation, and the many priests stationed there cared for patients, from dawn until night. In other words, there was little for nobles volunteering to actually do, and as a result bored nobles began enjoying secret trysts there. Her maid disagrees, stating that she's never heard of such stories. Aura explains that it was only because those rumors never really circulated within high society, since the Monte Grace is so remote that people rarely take an interest or visit, and that also made it an easy place to avoid other nobles' eyes. Era deduces from the priest's reaction that they seem somewhat aware of the rumors. When Casper asks how she even heard about it, she replies that, of course, she learned of it in Twinvale. Era asks silently who was the man who'd told her the story, considering he knew about the place and he didn't appear like an ordinary person either. "Why would that man share this information with me?" she asks. That night, she walks with a lantern reflecting on how much detailed information the man she'd met at Twin Vale revealed. Regarding where to go and whom to meet and even how to persuade them to take action, precisely the only information she needed. She finally arrives, but as she tries to get a closer look at the figure, she steps on a branch that snaps. Panicking, she retreats to avoid being caught, only to find herself in the arms of a familiar presence. "Don't be startled, my lady," a calm voice reassures her. The man, revealing himself as the commander, explains that the matter seemed urgent, leaving him no choice. 2 days ago at Twin Vale, the commander had asked about her plans moving forward, and she revealed that firstly she needed to get an invitation to the Imperial Palace ball. She told him she was sure her aunt wouldn't want her to attend the ball, so the goal is to sneak the information before it's disposed of. She told him regarding the rumors she was sure the people will keep spreading them, and instead she just needed to get sharpened before it's too late. She explains that the noble woman acts as a sort of guardian, and though officially she still remains unmarried, the crown prince wanted an annulment, not a divorce, which is also the same with a woman. She reflects on how the rumors of a broken engagement and being an illegitimate child are very deadly for a noblewoman, so if someone like her shows up in the imperial ball, everyone will be out to tear her apart. Both the royal family and her uncle, she won't get protection from anyone, so she needs to set up at least a minimal safety net. She recalls the man telling her that if she ever wanted to return to high society, she should visit the Monte Grace because if it's her, she'll be able to obtain it. She disclosed with the commander that she needed to go check the Monte Grace poorhouse personally. In the present day, the man welcomes a lady after speaking, and when they go in, the commander comments that before the two people notice, they should take their leave. She looks up at the commander, however he quickly pulls away, explaining that in trying to conceal his appearance he ended up doing stuff without noticing. However, she assured him that it's okay since it was a dangerous situation. Stuck in deep thought, she thinks they've done more when it comes to physical contact, and then tells the commander it seems he needs to get a bit more accustomed to physical contact. She discloses that according to the rumors by now they should be quite an intense pair, and she believes if they just do exactly what they showed in Twin Vale, it should work. Everywhere the princess gaze lands, it feels as though a burning heat arises, as if I've been enchanted by something. My thirst and hunger never seem to fade. Why is it that I don't even feel the urge to push this woman away? As his heart beat louder, he reflects on how that day, the kiss he'd given the princess was almost instinctive, as if trying to quench the thirst he had been suppressing, because no matter how much water he drank, the patching thirst wouldn't go away. He wanted to drink everything about the princess standing before his eyes, as if it should have been that way from the start. It wasn't just that day alone, as every other day he faced the princess it remained the same. He longed to find out why he loses his composure every time he stands before the princess, and how he can stop the condition. Sensing his distraction, she tugs on his cloak, calling his name afterwards. He apologizes, saying he was only momentarily stuck in deep thought. He suggests they return, and as he walks he thinks, after all, when the contract is over, I would have to return to the north anyway. During their walk back to the poorhouse, she asks the commander how he'd known she was there, and he replies that he happened to see the princess entering the forest. He remarks that it seemed unsettling to openly follow her, and then asks if that person was the one she'd mentioned to be her ally. She tells him it's not yet certain, as she could only see their backs, but she should be able to find out soon. The next day, Lady Era greets the chief priest, who informs her of a distinguished guest who arrived the previous night. You must have heard his name too, Your Highness. This is Lord River Byron. The chief priest assumes it's their first meeting, and she responds that she had only seen him from afar during the victory ceremony, never expecting to meet the imperial hero there. She greets the Lord politely before turning to the chief priest to ask what brings Lord River to Monte Grace, and the priest explains that he has come to encourage the northerners residing there. Lady Era and Lord River had agreed to act as though they didn't know each other, a strategy that proved effective, as the social gossip hadn't yet reached Monte Grace. The chief priest turns to the Lord and asks about his plans, noting he'd mentioned staying at Monte Grace for a while. The Lord replies that he intends to observe the patient's conditions for a few days before returning. As they settle for the service, Era grows increasingly anxious, waiting for her ally to arrive. Suddenly, someone steps in, and as Era turns to look, she feels a surge of relief. She's found her, the living manual of social etiquette, Lady Chesterfield. The idol of young girls, the living manual of the etiquette of high society, the elegant white swan of Chesterfield, people called her Ermentia Chesterfield. Born as the previous only daughter of the Earl of Chesterfield, she mastered the art of etiquette from a young age, and soon she became so famous for her impeccable manners that any young lady preparing for her debut will vie for her as an etiquette instructor, and her influence soon reached the imperial palace. The lady was her etiquette instructor during the time of her practice for her debut. She questions silently whether the man's words really are true, whether she's indeed having an affair there. However, she dismisses the thought. Considering the situation with the Earl family, it's not so strange. The Chesterfield family had no heir to carry on their family line, and the late Earl, wanting to provide comfort for his beloved daughter, passed on the title to her fiancé a bit earlier than expected, and it seemed the fiancé cherished his wife dearly, with even whispers that there was no man like him. However, everything changed after the previous Earl and his wife died in an accident. Rumors spread that her fiancé had gotten a mistress, and he even brought her to the mansion, but it didn't stop here. Rumors that his mistress has a child for him and he plans to make the child his heir soon spread that the Countess even collapsed after hearing such rumors. After that day, the Countess didn't make any more appearances in high society, and soon after, all that was heard was news that she had left the capital. It was shared that the Countess was recuperating in the estate, and the Empress's request for her to become Judith's etiquette teacher was politely declined. Why then is the Countess staying in the Monte Grace? Why would the Earl keep this a secret? And what if the Countess isn't staying in the Monte Grace of her own free will? So where did the man obtain such information? Era questions. After the service, Era approaches Lady Chesterfield and greets her. The lady apologizes, explaining that she hadn't been feeling well the previous day and couldn't greet her properly. Era admits she had been a bit uneasy about staying at Monte Grace, but feels much more at ease with Lady Chesterfield around. She then asks if it would be all right to spend time with her occasionally, and she agrees. The chief priest approaches, introducing the three of them to one another. He then remarks on how rare it is to see the Countess so at ease with someone, noting that it seems as though the two were already acquainted. Era shares that the lady was her etiquette teacher, and it was all thanks to her guidance that she was able to have a successful debutante. Lady Chesterfield remarks that Era had always been an exemplary student, then inquires about the reason for her visit to Monte Grace. Era explains that she came to offer prayers to the divine, adding that it has been over half a year since her father fell unconscious. Lady Chesterfield points out that there's a temple in the capital, to which Era responds that she wanted to show greater devotion since her father is the only family she has left. She adds that perhaps serving the souls dwelling there might incline the divine to hear her prayers. "My lady, I'm certain the divine is already listening to your prayers," Lady Chesterfield says gently. She then offers her support, saying that if Era ever finds it hard to be alone, she should let her know, and she would gladly keep her company, and she thanks her. A few days later, Era reflects on how the Countess's initial wariness has noticeably lessened since their first meeting. As planned, the Countess seems to be opening her heart to her, seeing in Era a reflection of herself. Perhaps it was also influenced by their seemingly casual conversation that day. At one point, the Countess had mentioned hearing footsteps in the hallway late at night. She had asked if Era heard the same, but Era replied no, explaining she had gone to bed early. The Countess had dismissed it, saying she must have misheard, and asked Era to forget the matter. Yet, since then, the Countess has avoided her nightly walks, indicating she hadn't entirely let her guard down. "For now, all I can do is keep watching," Era muses. Life in Monte Grace isn't difficult. Each morning begins with prayers, followed by food distribution for the poor, and after mealtime, they visit the infirmary to offer what help they can. While most treatments are handled by the priests, Era and the Countess can only provide words of encouragement. Even so, the priest seems visibly surprised whenever they enter the infirmary, a reaction easy to understand, as it's rare for nobles to personally tend to patients. Era comments on the worn and soiled blankets, to which the chief priest explains they don't have many spare patient gowns. Despite frequent washing and changes, the garments get dirty quickly. After blessing them, the chief priest leaves Era feeling unexpectedly refreshed. Seizing the moment, she suggests making new patient gowns and creating a cleaner environment, emphasizing how it would benefit the patients. She also mentions that it would be ideal to replace all the blankets if possible. However, the chief priest expresses concern about Monte's limited budget, to which in response Era offers to contribute more to the donation fund. Overwhelmed by her generosity, the chief priest begins to sob, thanking her for her kindness, but Era reassures him that it's all right and urges him to let her know if there's anything else they might need, instructing him to contact her maid if necessary. As they walk, she notices the path leading to a cabin in the distance, and the Countess's expression grows uneasy, while Era questions why the priest is emerging from there silently. Thank you so much guys for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and also don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments and leave a comment for part 2.